Good evening. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for Sharsheret's inaugural book club program. I am pleased to share that we have several community partners joining us here on tonight's program: JOFA, or the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance, Reconstructing Judaism and Ritual Well, Sviva, a diverse collective of Jewish womanhood, Women's League for Conservative Judaism, and Women for Reform Judaism. We are particularly proud that these diverse organizations have joined together for this important program. My name is Melissa Rosen. I am the Director of Training and Education at Sharsheret, and I will be moderating today. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items to share. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on Sharsheret's website along with the transcript, but participants' names and faces will not be in the recording. You may have noticed that all participants were muted upon entry. Please keep yourself muted throughout the program. We recommend that you keep your screen on speaker view. This will enable you to see the presentation clearly, and you can find this option in the upper right hand corner of your screen. We received so many insightful questions before tonight and expect additional questions now. Please use the chat box, which you can access from the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to address all questions. For those of you who are new to Sharsheret, and a reminder to the others, Sharsheret has been providing telehealth services to the breast and ovarian cancer communities for more than 20 years. And although we could never have imagined the world as it is right now, through our services, we have been preparing for this moment and continue to be there for each and every one of you. Among the many free programs and ways to receive support from Sharsheret to help women and their families navigate different aspects of a cancer experience, I want to highlight one tonight that may be of particular interest for those on today's webinar. Our Spungen Foundation Family Focus Kit provides wonderful resources to caregivers, to those who support someone facing breast or ovarian cancer. Caregivers can speak directly and confidentially with one of our skilled social workers with personal questions and request free caregiver information and a packet that includes all sorts of resources from Sharsheret and other cancer organizations to help you understand the diagnosis and treatment of breast or ovarian cancer and the support options available to you as a caregiver. As we move into tonight's webinar itself, I want to remind you that Sharsheret is a national not-for-profit cancer organization, support and education organization, and we do not provide any medical advice or perform any medical procedures. The information provided by Sharsheret is not a substitute for medical advice. Always seek the advice of your physician or qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding your medical condition. Okay, it is our honor today to have author, activist, and breast cancer survivor Letty Cottin Pogrebin join us. Letty is the founding editor and writer for Ms. Magazine. She won an Emmy for her work on the groundbreaking Free to Be You and Me, which was a children's book, record, and TV special. And she is the author of close to a dozen fiction and nonfiction books, including Deborah Golda and Me, and tonight's focus, How to Be a Friend to a Friend Who's Sick. I'm also excited to share that later on tonight, we'll be raffling off a signed copy of her book. She is currently working on her 12th book, Shonda, a memoir of shame and secrecy. I had the opportunity to reread parts of your book last week, Letty. What struck me was just how relevant it still was today, if not more so than when it was originally published in 2013. It's amazing. Can you talk a little bit about what in your personal experience led you to writing this book?
Yes, first of all, hi everybody. I love seeing all your faces and some of the names I recognize as well. I wrote this book because I wanted to read a book like this when I was in treatment. I really was shocked by how many of my friends were kind of awkward around me, didn't know what to say, said really stupid things, said upsetting things, didn't come through for me. The ones I wouldn't have expected to be warm and loving and responsive were, and the ones I would have expected to have been warm and loving and responsive weren't. They dropped out, they disappeared, they funked, they carried on, they kind of made me feel it was my fault, all kinds of bizarre reactions. And I was sitting in the Memorial Sloan Kettering waiting room where I spent 6 weeks of my life. And I Googled friendship and illness to see how to respond to the people who didn't seem comfortable dealing with me. You know, it suddenly became my problem. And there were no books that were able to kind of answer those questions. There were a lot of books on how teenagers should treat their friends if their friends are ill, which I thought was, you know, kind of reassuring, but surprisingly not for grown-ups. So I decided I would write one. And then I said, well, you know, I'm in treatment. I can't go running around the way writers and reporters are supposed to, interviewing people all over the country, getting a broad sampling and all of that. So maybe it's not a great idea. And then I looked around the waiting room, and there at Memorial Sloan Kettering was my sampling. People of every age, women and men, interestingly enough, caregivers who had come to accompany people to their treatments, and people who had flown in from all over the country and some from all over the world. So I started interviewing the people in the waiting room, and that was the genesis of the book.
Amazing, amazing.
The amazing thing, Melissa and everybody else, is, well, let me just cut to the chase. The message of my book is the new illness etiquette is honesty. And I was stunned by how responsive and open people were. The minute I started explaining what I was up against, how I felt, what kind of pissed me off about being sick, honest, my anger, everything else that, you know, people have been taught sort of to repress. And immediately the response was, let me tell you about mine. Let me tell you about a friend of mine. You won't believe what a friend of mine said, you know, or you won't believe the most wonderful thing friends of mine have done to make it easier for me. And so the waiting room was a kind of gift that kept on giving, because every day it was a different group. We were none of us scheduled for the same times. I had a particular treatment room, but I was scheduled for different times of day, and so were others. So I was constantly seeing a new round of people. And I just went right up to them. I said, I'm writing a book about friendship and illness. Can you tell me how your friends have responded? What's been helpful? What's made you cry? What surprised you? What about men and women and how they respond? And before you knew it, it was all about everything. It was all about everything.
Sounds like people were almost looking for a chance to share.
Yes, and I went beyond the waiting room because obviously 6 weeks isn't enough to write a book. And so I spent many months just seeking out people who weren't like the people that I had already interviewed. I mean, I did not interview anyone in the waiting room who had lived through the death of a child. I mean, I was in a cancer place. Right. But a lot of the people had heart conditions or had lost a spouse or a friend. But I really wanted, for example, in this book to talk to someone who had lost a child, because I could not imagine anything harder and to live through. And I hadn't the experience of how to be a friend to someone who had lost a child. So I went looking for things I didn't have, but other than that, you know, I seemed to kind of encounter people who had every possible kind of experience, mental illness, dealing with Alzheimer's. So I know that Sharsheret addresses breast cancer and ovarian and uterine cancer, as I understand it. But I think all of us on this call and in our lives have been through a lot of other stuff. So it becomes really a meditation on how to deal with stress and what to expect from one's friends.
So let me ask you, I know that many people, including myself, who are on the webinar tonight, have been truly hurt by people's reactions, as you talked about, or lack of reaction to a difficult diagnosis or situation. Do you have any advice for getting beyond that hurt? And does it make sense to share our pain with those who have hurt us?
Well, that's very well put. Several things were revelatory for me, let me put it that way. That very often people either spoke in platitudes, in cliches, because we don't really know the right thing to say, or they just blurted something out because they were shocked. I should probably back up and say the hardest thing for me to do at the very beginning was decide who to tell. Because you open yourself up to months and months of having to kind of update a lot of different people the more you tell. And then you have to live through it many times over because of that. And I could kind of foresee that I would really want at some point to stop being Cancer Girl. It was very helpful to me at first to have everybody suddenly say, oh, I don't know if you realize it, but I had cancer 35 years ago, and this is what I learned. When, you know, that was helpful. But when somebody would say, well, if you end up needing a mastectomy, at least you're married. You know, this was not helpful. This was not in the least bit helpful. And on the other hand, when I had two of my friends who had, within, let's say, 5 years, had breast cancer, and they became my walking partners. And when I freaked out, and when I didn't know what was going to happen, and I didn't understand what was happening to me, and I couldn't kind of decode all the language in the very beginning, they were invaluable because I could ask them anything. And that's when I said to you earlier, honesty is the best etiquette of illness, because they gave me permission to ask them anything. And if you can find among your friends, and let's face it, Jewish women, 1 in 8 of us have breast cancer. I'll never forget a dinner party in my house, 10 couples, 5 women, 4 of us had breast cancer. So it's not as if this is, quote, the C word, which was my mother's generation, you know. We can talk about this now because we know so many people who've had it, people who've struggled, people who've had every version of it, and people who are thriving. And if you can find honest friends who will walk you through it, who are willing to revisit their misery, their fears, and I tell in the book about my friend. I had 2 friends, Lynn and Joyce, both journalists, one at the New York Times, one was the editor of Working Woman, and they had each had it in recent times, and so stuff was fresh in their mind. I asked Lynn, how did you tell your kids? I have 3 kids. They were all out of the house. I got my cancer when I was 70, by the way, so that my kids were well grown. And I said to Lynn, I have really made a mess of it with my children. I told them by email because I was terrified to hear their voice or have them hear my voice, or to call a family meeting. I thought it would be, you know, terrifying for them to hear that I'm calling a family meeting. Why am I calling a family meeting? It was the day after Yom Kippur in 2009. I hadn't even committed a single sin, and I got my diagnosis. And I know my children. I know they couldn't tolerate not knowing, and they're, you know, older people, human beings. But I made a terrible mistake doing it by email. they felt so dissed, you know, they felt so like I was making them like any other group of friends. Because I told my other friends by email too. It's just that I was protecting myself from falling to pieces. And I was afraid that I would see their reaction, it would make everything worse. So my friend Lynn just reassured me. You know, she said she did the same thing and her kids survived it and forgave her. You know, we don't necessarily do the right thing.
Of course, we're all human, but you know, you bring up an interesting point in terms of caregivers. You know, some of them have very close relationships to us. There are children, our partners, our parents. Some are our dear friends, and sometimes even neighbors and colleagues take on that role. But as caregivers, many of us feel awkward or even get tongue-tied in the presence of a friend or family member who's facing a serious illness. Your book offers a lot of wonderful advice about what to say and what not to say. Can you share a few examples of words that are comforting and maybe some of those better left unsaid?
Yeah, you froze, Melissa. Can you all hear me? Just nod if you can hear me. Okay,
thank you. Questions?
Yeah, I did hear the question, but you had frozen. I'll tell you first 3 things not to say, because otherwise everything's so individualized. But oddly enough, how are you is a really hard thing for us to all hear. I don't know where all of you are in the process, but when it was the worst time for me, the last thing I wanted to answer was, how are you? Because I knew if I started to tell them how I really was, I would give them too much information. I would see, if I was with them, I would see their eyes glaze over. If I was on the phone, I would hear pots because they would be making dinner or sweeping or doing something else while I was going on and on about my oncotype and my clean margins. Excuse me. So how are you is not a useful question. I ended up liking people who said things like, what's new? What's new is so wide open. You know, it's like our Yiddish relatives used to say, so new. And that's basically very open-ended for me. So the other thing is, you look great. I came to loathe that line because I knew
put that in the chat. Yeah.
Yeah, because I knew that I wasn't asked every single day by all my friends, you look great, or told you look great. So this was a measure of me not looking like myself. This was them cheering me up. This was totally transparent and not useful. The third thing was, oh my God. You know, when a teenager says, oh my God, it means, oh my God, I had just got the best sandals, you know, or I just saw a wonderful, great movie. When a person my age says, oh my God, it does not bode well. So I didn't want to hear, oh my God. Now, as far as what I did want to hear, it's what I said to my friends, which was, may I tell you what's helpful and what's not, you know? And I wish they had said, may I ask you what's helpful and what's not? Because then it would give me permission to do that, you know? In other words, if someone had said to me, would it be helpful if I asked you what I could bring instead of just bringing, you know, like a Zabar's basket full of stuff, or just bringing a plant? Because I would have said to someone who said that, you can ask me. I know you're going to bring something. You're one of those people who brings when they come to a sick bed. But what I really would like is lamb chops and a brownie, because that's what were my comfort foods when I was going through the tough stuff. I wanted lamb chops, my favorite food, lamb chops, pesto, pasta, and a brownie with walnuts. And, you know, if people asked me that, I would have been so happy to tell them. If they had asked me, what haven't you read, instead of bringing me what they thought maybe I would read, or maybe regifting a book. If people who would have given me something very expensive like a Zabar's gift basket. I don't know what you know what goes in them, but it's like $150. I would have preferred a certificate for a massage, frankly, for creature comforts. That's what we need most when we're facing our own mortality or in pain or scared to death. Just to be able to zone out on a massage table before I was walking around with a drip thing in my chest. That would have been, to be able to say that, to say to people as a patient, may I tell you what's helpful and what's not? May I tell you when to come and when to leave? May I tell you what I like and what is really not helpful? That permission would allow a relationship to happen where the friend is not always second guessing. Oh my God, did somebody, I went to the hospital room and it was full of bouquets of flowers, and I sent flowers. Why didn't I think of something else? Mm-hmm. So when you're thinking about a visit, you might really say, ask the partner or the person who is taking care of that person, what's the best time of day? And maybe I can call in advance, and would that be okay? And if I bring rugelach, will I be the 12th person to bring rugelach? Just that kind of individuation, I think, and permission to say anything and ask for anything is what connotes a really useful and reassuring and comforting and energizing and nourishing friendship.
That's great. And I love that I'm seeing in the chat people sharing their own experiences of what has been helpful for them and what have they hated too.
Oh, I see. I forgot to look in the chat.
Oh, that's okay.
LB, I had a friend who sent me a joke a day. I love that. LB said, I asked people who wanted to call to tell me a joke, so I had a chance to laugh. So I loved it. I got a joke a day, and my friend Marlo Thomas, you mentioned Free to Be You and Me, so we've known each other for more than 40 years, and when I was going through this, Marlo sent me pretty much a joke a day. And my favorite one was, she said this man was in a terrible accident, and he was wrapped up in bandages, head to toe, everything covered in bandages, except one eye was out. And the doctor came in and looked him over and says, I don't like the looks of that eye.
Yeah, very uplifting, right?
Love that.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Let me ask you another question. At Sharsheret, sometimes we find that people are reluctant to take on the title of caregiver. For example, when a spouse or partner is dealing with the day in and day out, an adult child or a friend may feel it's not their place to have that title. How would you define caregiver? And then secondly, how do you feel about the term caregiver? I just did a program last week and somebody said, I hate the term caregiver. I'm not caring for my daughter. She's an adult. I use the term love giver. So how do you define a good definition of caregiver? And is that phrase a comfortable one for you?
I don't like that phrase myself. The alternative to me that I hear in my ear is caretaker. Which is kind of like doing your lawn. I think all of those titles are for other purposes originally, and so they don't fit us. But helper doesn't always work. Companion feels a little kind of, little old lady in a shawl. I don't know if we need language like that. Just it's Marcy who's hanging around and helping me, do my shopping, or some way of not making a genre out of it, if you know what I mean. But I do think while we're on the subject of caregivers or whatever we want to call them, is they very often need a friend. The stress on caregivers, since we haven't thought of another title, or helpers or companions or partners, is at times worse than the stress on the patient, because the patient knows how she feels and the caregiver has to sometimes guess or anticipate.
So that leads to my next question, which is how
Okay.
do we support not just those facing illness, but primary caregivers who are really sort of getting a double dose of all of this?
Yes. Well, they could use a massage also, but probably most of all, what they need is time off. So if you can relieve them, if you can say, why don't you just go out to lunch, or why don't you take, a couple of hours to walk in the park or run or go to your gym, I'll handle this now. That would be the best gift of all. And also a caregiver told me that, because as I said, I interviewed the people who accompanied people into the Manhattan MSK waiting room. So they were very often the caregivers. And they said, sometimes people forget that besides this person in my life who I'm taking care of, I have like a sick mother over here. I have a kid I'm worried about. I have a whole life. My life is not just this person, how much as I might love her or be paid for it. And I think we sometimes forget that the person who's caring for the person we care about has a life.
Yeah, absolutely. We got a question from one of our community sponsors, our community partners, Sviva, and it's a great question that follows this perfectly, which is, cancer or illness in general can feel so very isolating. And in addition to the support that someone receives from family and close friends, some of us are lucky to get additional support from community, which of course does not only support the patient, but relieves the caregivers. But to you, what would great community support look like? And could you also talk a little bit about why it's important?
Well, I think if you kind of enlarge what I said about my two walking friends, that's what community sport does, except it does it on a broader scale, and it gives you probably more people in your life who have something closer to what you have. There came a moment where I felt the last person I could be helpful to was somebody who had a double mastectomy or who was in chemo, because I came out the other side of this much faster than somebody who had a mastectomy or chemo. And there was nothing I could give except my own sense of what I went through. I couldn't imagine, it's so impossible to imagine worse than what I went through, because what I went through I thought was hard enough. So I found it hard to imagine myself being helpful. In a larger support group, you can make alignments based on something closer to your own experience. I will say, however, and I don't know if Sharsheret is going to love this, but there were people who told me they hated support groups because it brought them down.
Right.
And if you don't organize it in a way that, there are not people crying and weeping and feeling they're going to die within, keeping those people from pulling down the people who just got a diagnosis, that's really hard. So I passed that along to you because I was told that.
Yeah,
a couple times.
It's valid. I think Sharsheret would wholeheartedly agree. For some, support groups are the best, and for others, one-on-one support, or everybody is different, and that's really very important.
I want to pick up on somebody. I said I can't get rid of the list of participants, so it's hard for me to see the chat except once at a time. If you have any suggestions for how to move the participants out of the way.
Yael, do you have an easy way for Letty to do that?
I would pay you to call me Letty for the rest of my life, because nobody says it so beautifully. Thank you.
Well, you're more than welcome.
I have to learn to call myself that. Anyway, somebody here said something really that I wanted to talk about, and now I can't find it, but it was something like, be strong. or, you know, be positive or be tough. Or
You're so brave. You're
be
so brave.
Okay, it was be brave. It disappeared from the chat. Military metaphors were among my least favorite expressions of uplift, supposed uplift, battling. I don't like survivor, very honestly, because a survivor to me, I mean, I was a child of the Second World War. A survivor to me is a survivor and not a person who got through breast cancer. But again, the language is ill-equipped. I am ill-equipped to find any better language from the one we have, because I don't want us to be called victims. We're not victims.
Well, you're right.
We got through it, but I don't want to be told to be brave. I don't want to be told to fight. I don't want to be told that, you know, I should stay positive. I didn't want all that. They were kind of cheerleader lines, you know. They were not honest exchanges of concern.
So, Letty, right now you're a little frozen, but there were just instructions in the chat box about how you can change the view. And while you're doing that, I just want to point out that
thank you.
while Letty was concerned that that Sharsheret wouldn't like to say that support groups are not, you know, necessarily the best thing. I just want to point out that Sharsheret doesn't offer support groups. We offer one-on-one support. Some of the partners we work with have them, but we offer one-on-one and customized and personalized support.
Oh, good.
I want to ask you a couple of more questions before we get to some of the questions that came in through registration and through the chat box. So one of them is, could you talk for a moment about how being Jewish impacts the way you choose to caregive in your life? And is there also an impact to how you received care?
Melissa, please repeat that because you froze.
Sorry. So I wanted to know how does, or if it does, if being Jewish impacts the way you choose to caregive in your life, and did it impact the way you received care?
It impacted the way I received care from some people who are in touch with these matters, who are involved in meditation, who are involved in, Rachel Cowan was a very good friend of mine. I mean, people who interacted with Rachel interacted out of neshama, out of a Jewish tradition, out of an understanding that, you know, healing is possible through many, many different routes. When I was in the waiting room, the most interesting person I interviewed was a Hasidic man. I write about him in the book, and I will never forget him. He wore a shturmel, he had payas, he had, you know, the long coat, and he was carrying a book, the title of which was Shoah, which I read in Hebrew. And I opened the conversation with him, and I said, you know, I'm doing this book, and I'd like to interview you. He wouldn't speak to me. He paid me no attention. Maybe because I was wearing a tank top and blue jeans, I could kind of excuse that. But I was really determined. So I said to him, look, you're reading a book, I'm writing a book, we're the people of the book. I finally got a laugh out of him. I said, I just need to know, I will never get into your community to be able to do these interviews. And I need to know, what's it been like in an Orthodox community where Bikur Cholim is such a big thing, and maybe you know that the Talmud says 1/60 of your pain is relieved with each visit by a sick person, and all the things that we know about Judaism and observing Judaism. And I said, what's it like in your community? You must get so much love and help. And he said, nobody knows. He said, I can't my Bible, my wife is the only one in Hashem, the only ones who know. He said, because I said, how could that be? He said, because I could never make a shidduch for my daughters if they knew there's cancer in my family. So that was a real stopper for me. That was something, I was romanticizing what Judaism does for us all, and suddenly he's telling me he couldn't reach out to anybody. In fact, it's a shanda. He would have to hide. So there's two sides to our coin.
Right. But thankfully, many of us have had very different experiences within our community, and I've heard many stories of it being, very wonderful in different faith communities.
I'm sure.
So
I'm sorry that was his experience.
Yeah. Let me ask you one other question that came in from one of our community partners from Women of Reform Judaism. And once this one is done, I think we want to start taking some participant questions simply because I don't want to run out of time. But this one we can't skip, which is really caregiving has taken on an entirely new dimension in the age of COVID-19. Can you share some stories or information that might be insightful or instructive based on today's situation?
I'm 11 years out from my diagnosis. So I have tried very hard to kind of totally embrace life as if I never had cancer, although we all could have it, the minute after we've had, our treatment's finished, we could also get it all over again. We all know that, we're all realists. So I can't say what in today's world I would do, except to say what has been really helpful to me with my friends over this time, because I haven't seen anybody. I left New York City on March 25th, and my husband and I are up here in lucky enough to be in the Berkshires. And we've Zoomed people, and those have become very intimate conversations. Right now I'm looking at, dozens of you, and I don't know you, but if I was looking at 2 other friends or 4 other friends, I could be very as honest as I would be if I were in the room. And I would be glad to be as helpful as I could from a distance. So I'm not the person to answer this based on personal experience, except to say that if it works for friendship in general, it's going to work for friendship in illness.
Okay, that's good advice. That's very good advice. And actually wonderful to hear that somebody's part of an observant community in her city, and her city was very, very helpful.
Oh, I'm sure that this man's experience is unique or is rare, but I have never forgotten it, because the pain and you talked about isolation, because his isolation was total.
Right, absolutely.
I see here that somebody said, attitude, what am I supposed to do? Just lay down and give up? I'm not always positive. I'm angry, sad, etc. Again, right. If we have to be protective of our friends and not show them our anger, we might as well not see them at all or talk to them at all. Very often, I discovered by visiting a friend of mine who had a very serious back operation, I realized I had called in advance. I thought I did everything right. I called in advance. I brought the best cookies in New York, which is from Levon Bakery. I thought I was being as careful as anyone could be. And then I left, my husband and I went, and we left afterwards. And I suddenly realized he was wearing freshly ironed pajamas. The bed was really neatly made. His wife had brought a chair over. She had made coffee. She had to leave the room to make coffee. They had moved the chairs. I realized that my visit had discombobulated his day in more ways than I could have anticipated. He must have been in crinkled pajamas or a t-shirt and a pair of, underwear. She didn't have to neaten up. She didn't have to go and make coffee. So, there are moments when you need to kind of take in the bigger picture, not just your good impulse, not just your best intentions. And what occurs to me when I remember that is, a friend of mine said that she went to visit a sick friend of hers, and she fitted in on her way to the gym. And she was kind of proud of herself because, you know, the hospital was out of the way, and but she arrived in her, you know, sweat pants and workout clothes. And the sight of her in this uniform of normal life was so depressing to her sick friend that she should not have visited at all. And that's what we don't necessarily consider. We're thinking, I really want to get up to see Anne, you know, she's in the hospital, and I'm just going to go out of the way, and I'm going to go out of my way and get to the hospital. And you're kind of pleased with yourself. You feel good about that. And then what you did was hurtful. We have to just enlarge the prism.
We just have to remember, you know, what's best for the other person, and even if it means curbing wonderful impulses.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we received so many meaningful questions from participants as they registered, and tonight through the chat function. So two of my amazing colleagues, Nancy Cohn and Deborah Litwack, both program coordinators from Long Island and Florida, are going to join us to see if we can get some of those answered.
Thank you. Letty, I'm going to start with a question that you addressed a little bit, but I think it's an excellent question and worth elaborating on. So someone shared she is not only a caregiver, but a patient herself at this moment. Can you offer some advice that might help her in this difficult situation?
Who's caring for you? I mean, this is like a triangle. And everyone has to kind of be aware of the other sides of that triangle. So don't be brave. It's such a, you know, you could just emblazon that over your desk. Don't be brave. Confess, share, explain. You know, I'm going through something. So I may be a little short-tempered at times. I may be tired. You know, I may be late. Again, I've never found honesty to be a bad thing. Even with people who are dying, maybe especially with people who are dying. I know you're not dying, but that I always kind of go to the furthest extreme of whatever I'm saying. And when a friend of mine was dying, I called her. We were pretty far apart in miles, and so I called her often. And I said, what do you feel like talking about today? She said, dying. No one will let me talk about it. So the same is true for a caregiver who's sick. You have to be allowed to talk about being sick too, and what you're going through.
That's great, thank you.
Sure, thank you, Letty. Another question came in. Someone shared a question about someone with a chronic illness, and surely that can apply to those living with metastatic cancer. When the need for supporting caregiving is ongoing, how do we change what we offer, or even how can we on the other side expect the continued care from caregivers?
Yeah, not just from caregivers, but continued attention from our friends, empathy from our friends. Over the long haul, you know, some people are really good in a crisis. They can come through for you. They'll just stop everything for you. They'll do all the right things, and they'll come with, you know, like gangbusters to be helpful. But if you have a chronic illness, if you have Crohn's disease, or if you have metastatic cancer, or if you're dealing with something you don't know the end of, very often people kind of check out. They cannot be with you for the long haul, or if they don't see what's wrong with you, you know, if they don't see what's wrong with you. Again, I use something like Crohn's, or you know, people who are in the early stages of Alzheimer's. If people don't see an ailment, they very often forget you've got one. And if you're like going about your business, if you're going to work, if you're making meals for your family, people can forget what's going on in the interior world that you live in. I would simply advise somebody who is feeling ill-treated or inadequately treated in that situation to say, look, I know it's really hard to realize that this is like the second year I'm in this situation, and I know it's hard to stick it out for me, but frankly, at this point, I can't get anything but bad vibes from you. So please back off. Please back off. I'm feeling your impatience. I'm feeling your insensitivity. I know you love me, but something's not working for us. So back off. The person will feel guilty and terrible, but you know, you got to save yourself.
Good advice. Do we have others?
Yeah, we do. Letty, can you speak to the issue of competition between caregivers and the primary caregiver blocking access to others who love the patient?
Yeah, I heard a lot of that. I heard a lot of that in terms of the spouse, really, from friends who felt that they had more to offer than the spouse. Generally, male spouse, you know, had more to be kind of usefully involved. That sometimes we say about fathers, they helicopter in and we're there all the time. And often the male spouses helicoptered in and felt fairly virtuous for doing what they did. And the friend had spent the day. Friend had spent the day. So the best advice I heard from anyone was simply to set up a schedule. And that was a schedule for, in the case I'm thinking of, for 130 people who were involved in one woman's friendship circle, who divided cooking, delivering, shopping for her, taking the kids, answering phone calls, answering emails, opening her mail. This 130 people had a spreadsheet, and they simply included her husband so that he understood this was a grid here. You're important, she loves you, you love her, but there are a lot of people here that your wife is very dependent on right now. And that seems to work.
That's great advice. That's actually what we did in my family when I was dealing with it. We created a spreadsheet. Okay, another question?
Good. Yes, one more. You made mention of someone, of allowing someone to speak about what they wanted. When they wanted to talk about end of life, it was there. Is there a sensitive way to, or an appropriate way to open that conversation with someone, to ask for an open and honest conversation without depressing them or sounding morbid?
Yeah, you don't want to anticipate it if they're not really, if that's not really what they want. You just want to open the door. You want to keep that door open. And again, if you say, what do you feel like talking about today? Instead of do you feel like talking about end of life stuff? What do you feel like talking about today? Do you feel like talking about how you feel or what you're thinking? What's on your mind, that wasn't on your mind yesterday? Put it that way. There are opening lines that's literally are opening lines that don't set the agenda. And that's what I said earlier about what's new instead of how are you? And what do you feel like talking about, or do you feel like talking at all today? Because I'm here, I'm here. And let me say, if you only have 20 minutes to be there, tell the person in advance. That occurs to me to mention, because how much time people spend with us when we're ill, or when we're in treatment, or when we're recovering, or when we just don't know what's going to happen next. Sometimes a visit, people may think that you're there for an hour and you have 20 minutes because you have to pick up the kids at school. And just, again, to be right up front. I wanted to see you. I wanted to bring you this casserole. And you got to put your casserole on the spreadsheet, or you get a lot of casseroles on Friday for the weekend and none on Wednesday. But, that has to be, again, that has to be out front. It has to be, I can only stay for 20 minutes, but this is why I came, and I wanted to see you, and I'll come back. When would you like me to come back, or should I call first? it's when once you say, I'm going to be honest, and I want you to be honest with me, you never have to worry about these things because you're going to forgive each other if you mess up. You've already said that. You already put the ground rules out there. I'm going to mess up. I'm going to say stuff that annoys you. I'm going to miss your signals. Please forgive me and tell me so I won't do it again.
That's great. That's great. We're all just
Okay.
human, like you said. You know what? Was there any other one you wanted to sneak in? We might have time for one more. Otherwise, we can move forward. Oh, okay.
Oh, I liked somebody said that nobody, she didn't want somebody with recommendations. I forgot the phrasing. The recommendation, use ginkgo biloba, or I swear by this doctor, or, the
Right.
most wonderful thing that happened to me was, falling into a tub full of butter, or, you just don't want other people's Bubba Meisers or cures. You have doctors for that. You have your own reading, your own research. And I hope everybody who is in the early stages is taking somebody with them to their doctor's appointments. That
Like it's allowed these days, or getting on the phone and listening in.
Yeah, well, that's right.
Absolutely. You know what? I am very cognizant of the time. As we end, I want to thank you, Letty, so much for sharing so much of yourself tonight. You've made what can sometimes be an uncomfortable situation a bit easier, when that hopefully more meaningful. I do want to take one more moment to thank again our community partners, JOFA, Reconstructing Judaism and Ritual Well, Sviva, Women's League, and Women of Reform Judaism. And a special thank you tonight for tonight's sponsor, the Florence and Lawrence Spungin Family Foundation, for their dedication to caregiver support. Right now, a link to a very quick evaluation survey is being placed in the chat box. Please, I ask you, take a moment to complete it. Evaluations really do inform future programming. And I'm happy to announce that later tonight, we will pick from among those who filled out these evaluations, and one person will win an autographed copy of this book, of Letty's book. I do want to let you know that one of the questions in the evaluation is if you're interested in having a program about supporting a loved one or creating a caring community in your community. Sharsheret offers some very meaningful programs these days via Zoom. And so if you're interested in bringing this content to your local community, there's a place to ask for that. There's a place to ask for caregiver support and a couple of other questions. As we close, I want to remind you that Sharsheret's team is here for you and your loved ones. Sharsheret provides support and programs designed to help navigate through the cancer experience. All are free, completely private, one-on-one, and contact information is being placed in the chat box now, as well as will be in a follow-up email. Our social workers and genetic counselor are available to each one of you. Your health and well-being is our priority. Finally, I just want to note that we have 2 additional book club events planned. Ali Rogan, author of Beat Breast Cancer Like a Boss, will join us on January 7th. And Jessica Queller, author of Pretty is What Changes, will join us on March 7th. And information about both of these will be forthcoming. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Letty. Please don't leave until you click the evaluation link, and have a wonderful night, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night. I'm going to wait a second to close just so we can get people to click that link. And also I see there's still comments, really lovely comments coming in. Can we post the evaluation link one more time? Okay, it just got posted again. And for those of you who are still on, there'll be a follow-up email with a link to the recording and a link to some of our resources online for caregivers by the end of the week. The next book is Beat Breast Cancer Like a Boss by Ali Rogan. And she's actually going to be bringing some fun friends with her, some surprising friends. Sharon's iPad raised her hand. Sharon, do you want to put what you have in the chat box? If you have a question? And I just want to remind the people behind the scenes to save the chat. Okay, can we post the evaluation link one final time and then we can shut down the program? Thank you very much. And I would say in 2 minutes, we can close the webinar. Everybody who will have wanted to fill it out will have clicked it already. And if they change their mind, there'll be another link in the follow-up email. Okay, wonderful. Have a fantastic night, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and being part of this really glorious community. And hopefully we'll see you at the next book club event. Bye-bye.